Hey guys, Brady here, and welcome back to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. And today we're going to do some IFR flying using GPS navigation and also the G1000 on the Cessna 172 SP. We're going to do a flight from Flagstaff to Sedona and go over the basics of how to fly a route, a little bit of autopilot, a little bit of IFR knowledge and training here. What I want to do is prepare you to fly and start flying right away using a GPS and show you just how easy this can be so that you can go start having fun right away. Now let's start here with our flight plan. We've got Flagstaff punched in. We've got Sedona punched in. Now where do we go from here? Right now we're just on a VFR direct GPS flight up here. We want to change that to IFR, and we're going to do low altitude airways. This is going to be a short flight. You know, given the wind, we may want to take off on 3, but because this is just for instructional purposes, we'll stick with runway 21. Actually, we're going to start at the parking. So let's have it start us at the parking. And then up here, you want to do your arrivals, which is going to be direct. That is the only option right now for Sedona. And for the approach, we're going to do a GPS approach for runway 3. Again, really the only option that you have. So once we type that in, once we punch that in, we're going to have our flight plan come up here and show us our flight plan and how we're going to fly this route. And as you can see, it's going to set us up with these fixes right here, right into runway 3. Now, if you pull up the nav log, you could also see each waypoint and what altitude you're expected to be at for that waypoint. You'll notice that our heading is 171 at first, and then we're going to be 202, 304. This is an eastbound heading here, but then westbound. So if you want to know what altitudes you're supposed to be flying at, whether you're eastbound or westbound, east altitudes are odd numbers, westbound's even. And for IFR, you do not go up 500 feet. So if this were a VFR flight, you would do like 5,000 feet. And then plus 500, so 5,500. You're always at that 500 for VFR. For IFR, it's just a nice even number, rounded number, I should say, to just 5,000 feet, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and so forth. So something to keep in mind if you're on a heading of 171, that's 0 degrees through 179. You're going to be on an odd number, altitude, 5,000 feet, odd number. As soon as you hit 180 degrees to a 360 degree course heading, which would be this 202, now it's going to go to an even number. So this would actually, we would want to change to an even number and be cruising at an even altitude. I'm not sure exactly how to change these specific altitudes in this menu, in this built-in menu in Flight Simulator right now, but it's just something to keep in mind when you're flying. Just remember east odd, west even. Let's go look at some very important stuff using one of my favorite websites, airnav.com. Let's go to Sedona. And this is where it's going to get nice and juicy, and I think you're going to like this information here. So when we pull up Sedona, we could see we could be on Phoenix approach, Phoenix for our frequencies. We've got AWAS information, and it's an uncontrolled airport. This is getting into the ATC stuff, so we're just going to ignore that for now and come all the way down here to our instrument approach procedures, which is only GPS runway 3. Now, normally there could be a ton of different options here, but for this specific airport, there's only a GPS straight in approach for runway 3. So let's talk about some of the things on this chart. Again, I don't want to go over every single little thing. I want to get you flying. There are all different kinds of approach plates, and this is a very basic one. There are some that have a lot more information and can get confusing. So this is a great example to start with. We'll start with our approach course. We know that we're going to be approaching at 033. We know that we've got our runway lengths here, our TDZE. What is that? That's actually the highest elevation in the first 3,000 feet of the runway, starting at the threshold. It's very specific data there. We can kind of just ignore that for now. And then our airport elevation, the type of plate this is, GPS runway 3. And let's just come down to this stuff here. Now, if you look at our route that we're flying, you'll see here's the runway. We're going to be coming in from this side, and then we're going to be on a right base for runway 3. And you'll notice Zabas is here, Baosu. These are all navigational waypoints for you to keep in mind. And when we go back to our chart, you can see these are here. See, there's Baosu. Mingi could potentially be way out pretty far away because this is also for bigger airplanes. So here's Mingi here. So that all corresponds. The Mingi Baosu is what we're looking at when we're looking at this plate. All you have to do is find them, and that'll start to make sense. Now, a couple things that we can look at here. We've got our official descent and start coming in on final at Exuity. So that starts at 8,000. It's a recommended 8,000 feet. 8,000 for altitude is what they're recommending to be at a minimum when you start your descent. As we get to Lyrit, which again, all of this is in our flight plan. When we get to Lyrit, we want to be at a minimum altitude of 6,600 feet. So you could be a little bit above that. And that's where we would pick up the localizer. That's what this cross is here. And you could start using the localizer and start looking out for the runway. Down here, we have the category of our approach, which is straight in S runway 3. And now the categories A, B, C, D, what is that? Well, we're going to be in category A. This is for airplanes that are coming in 90 knots or less. For faster airplanes, the category goes up. So these are bigger, faster airplanes as we go to the right. Now, what it's showing here for our category is 6,140 feet for our decision height. That is when we need to make a decision of, can we land on this runway or not, or do we need to start thinking about going around? So you just don't want to descend below 6,100 feet unless you have the runway in sight, or lights, runway lights in sight. So once you're at 6,140 feet, you're actually 1,347 feet above the touchdown zone. Now, the next number is really just rounded up. And this can help with the weather report. So if you look at the weather report and the clouds are below, 1,200 feet, then this is going to be, it could become a problem. But if the clouds are reported to be above 1,400 feet and the visibility is more than 1.5 statute miles, you should have a good probability to land. All you need to know is you have your waypoints here. You're going to be on a right base. We're going to be on a right base, runway 3. And we have some altitudes here that help you know what altitude you should be at when you're coming in for your descent. And also nautical miles in between each one. We also have some elevation data over here. And we're going to be landing in somewhat of a valley here in Sedona. So important stuff to note, how high it's going to be as we're coming in. I also wanted to mention Navigraph Charts. Really cool website I found. If you want to get really into IFR flying and flight planning and all this stuff is just so cool. It just costs money. That's why I haven't done it yet. But a really cool flight planner, and even has overlays showing you different options for approaches and departures, showing the map and then overlaying. So this is an ILS or localizer approach, and then it'll overlay it, showing how it comes off the map and connects to this chart. And if you are really into IFR flying, you may want to consider using this for your flight planning if you're going to be flying on a simulator a lot. Back to Sedona, the only other thing you really need to keep in mind here is just the runway length. We know that Sedona has a 5,132 foot runway, plenty of room to land a Cessna 172. But if you were getting into a runway that you were it was questionable whether you were going to be able to take off or land, this is what you want to use to calculate that. There are different charts based on the pressure altitude, based on different things here that will help you calculate what your takeoff distance might be, depending on what elevation you're at. Things like that can affect the performance of your airplane. The other thing is, in this case, landing distances. It's calculating it based on weight, based on your speed, the pressure altitude, and then temperature. And then for an operation on a dry grass runway, increase distances by 45%. This is all stuff that I had to learn and calculate a lot as when I was getting my private pilot license. So just remember that performance data is available. Let's go have some fun. We've got our route. We've seen the approach plate. We can reference that if we want to. And we're going to go get in our airplane, start it up, and fly this quick IFR approach. All right, and here we are in the aircraft. But it is a beautiful day in Flagstaff, and it's more like VFR conditions than IFR. So let's go ahead and change that. From live weather, instead, let's just have it start raining. There we go. Now I noticed there's a whole bunch of new checklist items here, which is awesome. I love that they have all this on here now. I don't know if this is from a new update or what, but really, really cool that they have all this. They even have checking the aircraft documentation on here. This is really, really cool to see. So I did an automatic start there. That's just Control E instead of going through everything. Now you'll notice that our flight plan queued up, and if I hold my mouse here over the range knob, you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, which is really nice. These displays are the exact same, so it looks like a lot. It looks like a lot of knobs, but really it's not. These are the exact same panels. The only difference is over here we have the map. We're going to turn on the pitot heat just because we're going to be at a high altitude and we need to try to prevent icing. Let's go ahead and start taxiing to the runway. And we're gonna go ahead and begin our taxi down Alpha. Very simple airport and a beautiful place to fly, Flagstaff and Sedona. So should be a nice IFR flight. All right, we're just gonna go right here for our takeoff. And before you take off, you're going to want to make sure that you have your transponder set properly. So let's zoom in here real quick and take a look at the transponder. That is this button right here. And that is how you set it. So you're going to get that information from the ATC, or for an IFR flight, they're usually going to tell you to squawk a certain code. This is where you put the code in right here. And you can, here's your ident button if the ATC asks you to ident. We can go back and VFR will automatically squawk VFR for you. And then here you have your modes like standby, on, and alt. We leave it on the ALT mode. It's generally what you have it on. When you fly, that gives them the ATC, the most information about your flight, like including your altitude. So that's about it for the transponder. I'm gonna go over a lot of stuff as we get up into the air, but I wanted to mention the transponder now because that's something that you want to set before you take off. All right, and we are cleared for takeoff. We've got our barometric pressure set. That's important. Make sure you have the right information for that. We could have checked the ATIS if you need to check the ATIS and get your altimeter. Our altimeter is 29902. That's going to give you the correct altitude. So make sure that you got that. The only reason that it was correct already is because we did an automatic startup. Now that we're about to take off, we can turn the taxi light off. Let's turn our nav lights on, strobe light on, and we also have our pitot heat on. It's time to turn onto the runway and take off. The one more thing that you could do is you could also set the altitude that you're going to want to be at on the ground, but we don't need to do that. It's fine. Let's get this bird up in the air. Start making our way to Sedona. $50 knots, 60 knots, and 70 knots. We can start to rotate. And we're up just like that. I'm gonna start trimming it up a little bit just so we keep a positive rate of climb here, which we've got. I'm gonna turn up the lights a little bit for the dash, instruments, and all that. So you can use these knobs for that. Alright, and we're off. We have begun our IFR flight. It's so cool seeing this rainy weather. Got a positive rate of climb, everything's looking good. Let's turn off our landing light. All of our other lights are on. Pitot heat is on, which is good. Now, as we're climbing, everything is looking good. We're pretty much on course, and now may be a good time to start thinking about using the autopilot. So first thing you're going to want to do is use this knob right here to set the altitude up here to say 9,000 feet, and we'll turn on autopilot. But there's nothing else selected except for autopilot, and it doesn't know how we're going to get to 9,000 feet. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use this vertical speed mode. So we'll turn that on, and then we can increase our vertical speed mode, which is this little number right here, using these two knobs right here, nose up and nose down. And we can decide how many feet per minute we want to climb up to 9,000 feet. So we could say 400 feet, let's do 500, and it'll start to pitch up more to climb faster. Once it gets to 9,000 feet, it will level off. And the same thing works for descending, except you'd be going down with your vertical speed. And that's really it for altitude, other than if you want to use this altitude hold button. If you hit that, it will hold whatever altitude you're on. Whatever you're at, if you hit that button, it'll stop everything immediately and hold whatever altitude you're at. So to get to a certain altitude, the one that you set up here with this knob, you just want to use the vertical speed mode for that. The next thing we have here is our heading. That's this little teal indication here. As you turn this knob, I'm using the mouse wheel to turn this knob, that little teal indicator will be the headings, the course selection for this. If you hit the button here, it will synchronize it to straight ahead, whatever heading you're already on. And then you can hit the heading select on, and it's going to hold whatever heading you have selected. So if I turn this, the airplane's going to turn that way. Turn it back this way, it's going to go back that way. And here's your heading that you're setting it at. So right now it's set to 168. The airplane will eventually get to 168. Now, one of the best ways to follow this plan, though, let me zoom out on the map a little bit, is to use the nav mode for the autopilot. So we'll disengage the heading and we'll go ahead and turn nav mode on. Now what the airplane's going to do is follow this flight plan, and it's actually turning right now to get to this line, and it's going to line up with this line and continue to follow the flight plan all the way for us automatically. So pretty nice, pretty convenient there. Right now it's lining up. Also, we have our comm up here. Something else worth mentioning, this is the knob up here, we've got the inner and the outer knob, and then the one in the middle here will toggle between COM 1 and COM 2, whichever one you want active. This is the standby, this is going to be the active COM. So instead of pulling up the ATC window and tuning to Phoenix departure automatically, you could actually do it here manually. So we could go to 126, then go to 375, and then hit this to swap from the standby to make it active. And now we've tuned to that. So now our option is to contact them instead of tune to it. So this window gives you the option to do it for you, or you can do it manually. We'll just go ahead and cancel the IFR flight plan so that we're not worried about the ATC for this, because for this tutorial. Now let's check out the CDI. Mention that the CDI is in GPS mode, so if I mess with it, then the nav mode isn't really going to be sure what we're doing unless we have it set and ready to go. So you can use your heading mode if you want to get your heading on the right course, and then activate heading mode so that while you're making changes to the CDI, the airplane's not gonna go all over the place. So up here we have our VOR. We can toggle the tuning box between nav 1 and nav 2. So just clicking it will switch, and then turning this knob will change the decimals. And here we have the main numbers if you change it on the bigger knob. And then once you hit this button, this is actually standby. Once you hit this button, then it's going to be active. So standby over here, active over here, standby over here, active. So the inner ones are your active frequencies. So let's say we want to set the VOR for Flagstaff, which is 113.85. Then we want to make that active. That is now active. And we have the FLG, which means that it found it. And if we wanted to, we could put our nav mode back to VOR. If we put our nav mode back on, the VOR 1 is now active. So the airplane is going to turn all the way around and start following that VOR. Could also adjust our CDI course over here with this knob right here. That will change the course of the CDI. And then if you click it, it'll automatically center the CDI on the selected VOR. Some other functions there with the VOR. If I hit the CDI, go back to GPS mode, then it's going to get us back on course for our trip to Sedona. So that's how you work the VOR, but you got to remember that a lot of VOR stations are actually out of service, not working, so it'd be something that you want to find out if they're working or not. And there is a way to do that up here with the transmitter to check and see if it's working. I do not know exactly how to do it, so I'm not going to try to teach it. Coming down here, also wanted to show this PFD button. I really like this wind feature. This wind feature is very, very cool. You could do option 1. They also have an option 2 for wind, or you could do the what I like the best, the wind coming from 270 at 10 knots. So I really like this feature, and I always turn it on and leave it on. So if you want to see the winds and what the winds are doing, that is super cool. Let's see, we've got DME here for nav 1. We've also got bearing 1 and bearing 2. Little windows here if you want those. And then for our HSI, we could do the 360 degree view, or we can do an arc. It's more like a airliner if you want more of an airliner mode. Alright, and it's getting us back on route. If you hit this button, the TMR reference, you're actually going to get some references for the airplane's speeds, like glide speed, VR, and you can navigate these. If you toggle the selection cursor down here, you hit this button, then it will let you cycle through some different things, and you can decide to turn them on if you want. If you turn them on, it will come up here next to your airspeed, these V speeds, and show them up here, which is very nice if you wanted to do that. Also gives the option to have a timer, and that timer can count up or count down if you want it to. Also over here on the right side here where we have a big map, you could also hit some buttons like the map button over here, GPS. Then you can do some weather to get some of these rain cells. You have some weather radar information here and some topographic information with this button. And then if you want to use this one, it's actually just clearing some things you can't really see because there's not much to clear, but it's just cleaning up the map a little bit, this button, just making it a little more clean if it gets chaotic. Coming down to the flight plan button, we have a very small menu here, and it is showing our flight plan. If you hit this button, you can toggle, cycle through some things, and you can actually add waypoints or add new airports to your flight plan if you want, or you could do a direct to. So another thing to keep in mind is you could do a direct course to and just type in the airport altitude that you want to be at and go directly to that airport. And what that's going to do is just change this line here directly to another airport. Nearest is going to show you the nearest airports. The nearest button will show you the nearest airports and the runway links for them to make sure that you have an airplane capable of landing at one of their longest runway. So it's going to show the longest runway length for that nearest airport. So that's the nearest airport button. Menu button is just unfortunate that it doesn't work at all, but that's okay for now. I'm sure maybe there'll be an update eventually and maybe it'll work. Now let's take a little break and enjoy the view for a minute. Someone was asking me about the mixture. Basically sets the amount of fuel added to the intake airflow. So at higher altitudes, the air pressure and therefore oxygen level declines. So the fuel volume must also be reduced. So we lean the mixture usually in higher elevation. Now as we're coming down in elevation, you would actually go more rich. At sea level, like in Florida, we just mostly you have the mixture just full rich. But what you can do is you can play around with how this is affecting your RPMs, and that's how you know, because you just want to get the most RPMs out of your engine. And so you can make minor adjustments here, and you'll see my RPMs are dropping. If I lean it too much, it's going to start dropping. Or if I'm too rich, it's going to start dropping. So there's a balance in there that you want to find that's giving you the most RPMs. And that's really it for the mixture. Got a little bit of icing building up, which is a little bit concerning. We'll see how bad it gets. I think we're actually going to start descending soon. I remember we were cleared for the Bosu transition, is what they would clear us for. And then we could pull up our chart here that we had. And you can see that when we get to XUT, or Bosu, we'd be at 8,000 feet. XUT would be at 8,000 feet. And then when we go down to Lyrit, we're going to be at 6,600. Okay, so we want to hit this XUT at 8,000 feet is the plan. Right now we're at 9,000. We were told to go up to 9,500, but I was hesitant because of potential icing that I've been dealing with. We are no longer flying autopilot. I'm doing everything manual. You can still fly IFR manual. You don't have to be on autopilot. Using our screens, all of our information here to fly manually. May actually start zooming in a tiny bit. So we're going to continue down to Lyrit. We should be at 6,600 feet at Lyrit, so we need to come down quite a bit here. And then as we're starting our descent, this is where you could use the descent checklist. If you want to remember to keep pulling up those checklists. It's a very important thing that you do when you're flying in real life. You don't have to do it in a simulator, but it's good to get in the habit of using the checklist. We've got a great view of the runway and we're good to go for landing. We're coming in about 90 knots, so I'm getting a little slow. Everything's looking good. There's a beautiful storm in the background. Very cool. I'm going to put a notch of flaps down here. We've got our landing light. Could turn the pitot heat off at this point. Let's do another notch of flaps. We're bouncing all over the place here. It's pretty turbulent. Pitch up and hold it off. Bleed off some airspeed. Alright, we're on the ground. And immediately it wants to throw me off the runway. So in many cases, the simulator can actually be more challenging than reality because it does stuff like that. Like right now, it's wanting to go left, like take a hard left for some reason. But it is all good. We made it. And hopefully you have a better idea now of some IFR flying, some autopilot, and using GPS navigation and also shooting a GPS approach. Enough to get you from one airport to the next using GPS. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and I'm looking forward to doing some more live streaming soon and going to be doing a lot more bush flying and things like that. So let me know if you guys want a tutorial, more tutorials on certain things, specific things. If this video happens to be way over your head, just be sure to check out my first one where we flew from Sedona to Flagstaff on a VFR flight, and I would watch that one first before this one. It's always a beautiful day even when it's raining in Sedona, so I'm gonna go into town and grab some lunch. Take care.